After the Civil War, Reconstruction began. There were different plans for Reconstruction. Lincoln's main goal was to reunite the Union, and he had the 10% plan where 10% of the 1860 voter base had to swear loyalty to the Union. The Radical Republicans' main goal was to punish the South and African American rights. They had the Wade Davis bill, where 50% of the state's population had to swear loyalty and Confederates must lose civil rights. Lincoln's vice president for his second term was Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat and former slave owner, to make him a more appealing candidate to Southerners considering whether or not to re-enter the Union. Johnson blamed wealthy landowners for the war. His plan was for any Confederate with over $20,000, which was closer to $1 million when adjusted for inflation, lost civil rights, and required ratification of the 13th Amendment. After Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 4th, 1865, Andrew Johnson became president, and in the election of 1866, the Radical Republicans gained control of Congress. Andrew Johnson did not have a high priority on African American rights. He vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, although Congress overrode the veto, making it the first time in history. Andrew Johnson was also the first president to be impeached, although he was not found guilty. After slavery ended, many African Americans actually stayed on their plantations because they became sharecroppers, where a landowner provided the sharecropper with land and tools to harvest a crop in exchange for a share of the crop. They usually borrowed the tools at high rates, and the sharecropper was in constant debt. Some became share tenants, and they were able to buy their own supplies to save money, as well as choose what crops to plant. And some became tenant farmers, who got to choose where they would live, what crop they would plant, and got to keep their whole crop. They only had to pay rent to the landowner. Some southern states set up black codes that required employment, made it illegal for freedmen to gather without a white man present or to be taught to read or write, and segregated public facilities. The former slaves that were able to leave their plantations became carpenters, blacksmiths, cooks, and house servants. Women took in laundry, childcare, and domestic work. Many of them began to acquire basic literacy. In 1866, there were as many as 150,000 African American men and women acquiring basic literacy, and in 1869 that had doubled. African American churches served as school sites, community centers, employment agencies, and political rallying points. They helped develop African American leaders. During Reconstruction, there was an increase in corruption. Some people would take money from the defeated South, offering to help, and then run away with the money. The election of 1876 was very close. Both the Democrats and Republicans asked for recounts, and the Compromise of 1877 was made to settle the election. In the Compromise of 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president. Federal troops were removed from the South, a Southerner was appointed to a powerful cabinet position, and the South got money for its own reconstruction. After federal troops were removed from the South set up poll taxes of $1 or $2, which were much higher back then because of inflation. Most African Americans could not afford. Literacy tests, teaching an African American to read or write, was illegal under the Black Code, and grandfather clauses that required that a relative voted in 1866 when it was illegal for African Americans to vote. The South also set up Jim Crow laws. Homer Plessy, who was actually only 12.5% black, today you have to be at least 14% to be considered black. Homer Plessy challenged the Jim Crow laws, and in the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was legal as long as the facilities were equal.